Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Community Indicators Victoria, for inviting us. We are a little different, I have to say, and so I have to say up front is that I won't be presenting any data because that's probably part of the conversation today. My name is Lucy Murphy. My role at Annecto is practice consultant within the development team. And I'd like to introduce Glenn Lawless, who is manager of the development team, and Adam Shickerling, whose role is regional manager of innovation and leadership. This morning, we're really going to focus on our journey that Annecto has taken. Probably, we talked about the last 3 years, but probably really it's been the last 8 years, in which we are reorientating our organisation from that of a charity focus to a human rights and inclusion organisation. Our presentation is about Journeys Annecto in that, and how we're taking the position that people with a disability and elderly are impaired by, are not disabled by their impairment, but actually as well as the community. So we've recently chosen to work with selected communities to begin to foster inclusion and thereby remove the visibility of disability, or that is our intention. We will continue to provide support for people on an individual basis, albeit with the intention to support them to purposefully engage with their community, and with a particular focus on building resilience, capacity and capability, and developing key partnerships through that. So as I said, I really wanted to stress that we actually, at the moment, have no data to show yet, but we are actually building and have actually spent the last really 3 years, I would say, intently focusing on what we need to do and identify what we actually need to measure in order to actually take us forward. So who is Annecto? Annecto is an Australian incorporated not-for-profit association. We turn over approximately $30 million annually, and I think that's actually increased recently with more aged care packages. We support approximately 12,000 people each year who experience disability and getting older in metropolitan Melbourne and rural Victoria, and recently we have expanded into Sydney, Western Sydney, with aged care packages. And we also provide after-hour support in Tasmania as well. We work with people on what a good life might mean to them and how they might do this through being more connected with their own community and by providing support in order to get there. Annecto has been around for about 50 years, formed initially by parents of children with a disability. We have traditional services that included day service, residential group homes, as well as after-hour service and assistance to people in their own home and their community. We also foster systemic advocacy and are involved in research. So advocacy is one of our main focuses. We have a workforce of over 500 staff, volunteers and students. And we have approximately 300 links within the community that include business, community organisations, government, so local, state and federal, that focus on people living good lives in their community. And what we are is committed to having meaningful conversations with people we support who tell us they want to live lives within their community and not be the clients of aged and disability service providers. We are reminded that people's lives are much larger than the space we as organisations occupy, which is a really big shift, because I think in the past, traditional or services like ours have really worked with people on the basis that we are everything to them. So it's a really big shift for us as an organisation. So I'm going to actually touch on the informing frameworks that have actually changed the way that our organisation is actually doing our work. So about 3 years ago, or actually probably longer than that, I should say 5 years ago, we actually sat around, there was the board, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we actually started to say, how are we going to change this? And we've all heard of things like leadership development, organisational restructures, staff engagement strategies, future-proofing. And so we've tried it all. And so one of the things that we actually decided to do is really strategically say what is going to shift our organisation. And there is a number of informing frameworks up here which I will try to briefly touch on. So person-centred thinking and valued roles. So I'm sure many of you have heard about person-centred thinking and the changes, what that means. And it's about looking through the lens of valued roles and responsibilities of individuals. And we have particularly focused on social role valorisation theory and the works that have further developed out of this. So this is the idea that looking at what roles actually people hold, and for people particularly who have with a disability or who are elderly, often their roles, they don't have opportunities to actually gain roles such as an employee, a student even, and I know that that's changing, but often these roles are actually not afforded to people who are actually vulnerable. And particularly people who are elderly, is that often their roles are actually taken away, so that they may have been a nurse, a teacher, and so when they retire, they need to actually find other things to do that actually supports them to have meaningful, valued roles in their lives. So it's really the idea of looking at how we can actually support people to continue on with those valued roles or have opportunities to actually gain further roles. Storytelling is a major piece of our work that we are actually starting to use or develop. And we know that our practice is strengthened through the use of individuals and collective narrative. Our storytelling strategy, which we actually have developed, states that we use story to learn, share and influence and respond with the guiding principles of how we are doing it. That people are the owners of their own story, that people's stories are based on their experiences, and we value and acknowledge the uniqueness of each person's story, and that collective and individual stories will inform our strategic intent and culture. So it's the notion of actually, it's not just about data or anecdotal evidence. It's actually really acknowledging that using people's real life stories to actually inform us what we're doing as an organisation. The other thing that I will probably go into a little bit more detail, and this has probably been the major change of our organisation, is the idea of organisations as living systems, that we're not just machines. And I think in the past and we could all attest to, is that somebody would leave and we'd just replace it, and it's the idea that organisations are machines, is that we've actually taken the approach that we are full of living people, living systems. And so the idea is that as things change, then we will rearrange ourselves to do that. So I'll just quickly touch on the theory, and there is a lot of written work on this, is that that living systems do a number of things, and I'll just touch very briefly on some of those things. They only accepts its own solutions. They pay attention only to that which is meaningful to it, the here and now. They participate in the development of its neighbour, so an isolated system cannot be sustained. It's always in a state of change. So I think within our own organisations we actually realise that we actually try and recognise that, but how do we actually organise ourselves actually to manage that change? We seek diversity, and we're always not intent on finding the perfect solution, rather what works. We can't be steered or controlled, that it can only be teased or nudged to see things differently, and we change when its perception of itself changes. And it can be very unpredictable at times, but we actually will arrange ourselves to actually create order as needed. We also have, obviously, inclusion has been a major part of our work and informing framework, and results-based accountability, which Glenn and Adam will actually talk more about. So, as I said, we actually started off with the board. So the board actually held a residential, and actually about 5 years ago, and actually got a futurist in to actually talk about what the future would look like. And this was at a time when the aged care reforms were actually starting to be talked about, as well as the NDIS. So they actually realised that they needed to respond. So as a result, the question was put forward to them about what do we need to do to change. And so the idea was, a decision was made by the board at that time to move from a charity organisation, because that's what we were known as, to a community inclusion organisation. We started with person-centred practice and valued roles, as I talked about. Community inclusion, human rights was a major underlying intent for this change. And they also realised we actually needed to start collecting data, because we had collected information, but it was in databases and it was just everywhere, and that we actually did not have anything or any meaningful way to actually tell us what we were doing, whether it was good, bad. It was very anecdotal stories about what was happening. So the Annecto board set a very clear intent, as I said 2 years ago. So it was emerging as a community inclusion organisation working to realise inclusive lives in communities. And we set about, through that, is that we set about actually consulting in a range of different ways. We actually held a consultation at the Arts Centre with, I think, 200 people that actually asked them, what does inclusion look like? What does it mean? And so we then actually consulted with another, I think over the next 6 months we consulted with 2,000 people, community members, people who used our service, families, and actually that led us to defining our new purpose. So which is connecting individuals and communities to realise an inclusive society. Now, it actually doesn't sound that much different from what our old, I think, vision statement used to be, which was actually supporting individuals to realise, to be included in their community. The really big shift in this, and I guess why it's actually really linked to Community Indicators Victoria and the work that they're doing, was it actually shifts our purpose to actually working with individuals to be included, but actually what work do we need to do with the community? So it was actually shifting, so it gave us a different purview to work at a community level as well, as opposed to in the past we were just working with individuals. And it's something that we're still grappling with, and this is why gathering the data is so important, because it will start to shift and help our staff even shift to actually say the work is also within the community. We actually also developed a set of 4 new principles, which and the humanity, interdependence, authenticity, and emergence. And that, once again, they're based on the idea of human rights, the interdependence, the idea that everybody, in disability and aged care, we talk a lot about independence, people being independent. The idea is actually that we are not independent, is that we actually rely on lots of different things in our lives to actually allow us to live good lives. Authenticity, the idea about being accountable, and emergence is that, once again, it's amazing what can emerge if more than one person is actually involved and thinking about something different. This is just a graphic recording of a consultation that we actually had after actually introducing our purpose and principles after 12 months, and actually was the idea of actually working through what is going to stop us from achieving this. What are going to be the beliefs that limit, and then that informed us of the work that we needed to do. A lot of the stuff that actually comes out of this is about evidence and accountability, so which again reinforces our initial notion of having to collect data. The other thing, which I'll quickly just talk about, is how we needed to reorganise ourselves. And I talked a little bit about living systems, and that was one of the main things that came out of it, is that our structure was not working. And so, as I said, we've attempted to actually structure ourselves in the past, but it kind of just didn't quite hit the mark. And so the question is, what structure will be the lightest one that will support the organisation to reach our vision of community inclusion for all? And this is kind of a visual representation of, the different types of structures, hierarchical networking. And so the type of structure that the organisation has actually adopting is that of a network organisation. So it's really changing the idea of us being a hierarchical organisation to actually working not only across different people, work on different projects across the organisation to reach inclusion, but also within partnerships within the community as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Glenn.
Okay. So Adam and I are going to do this jointly. As Lucy highlighted, the need for data. We embrace story across the organisation, but the need for data to empirically support people's story, we needed to find different data sets. So we met with community indicators some years ago to actually develop to ascertain if there was a framework out there that we weren't aware of, that we could make some sort of judgment as to whether we're in fact making a difference in people's lives and in fact in the community's lives, because we frankly didn't know. So our process is that we look to a series of indicators. We also use the Charter of Human Rights, and there's a range of indicators that we've identified that we want to use. So we're at that point. Now, with the person, I'm just looking at the next stage is the gap analysis. One of the keys that we're trying to establish is some of the lessons learned by a group of people who have mostly been marginalised. And it's often said that adversity is the mother of all invention or creation. So people who have lived with adversity in their life have a great set of skills that are often not used. So if we can do some sort of evaluation or a gap analysis to assess whether in fact there's a latent body of knowledge or skills that's not being used by the community that will in fact benefit the community. So we want to get a sense of how the experiences of the people that we support reflect against a range of indicators, the community indicators. Again, as Lucy said, we don't yet have data, but we're working towards that because we didn't have a system to collect the data from the people that we support. But our ambition is, in fact, we're probably weeks away with starting that now. Conversations that matter. A key part of the organisation's evolution or emergence has been that we understand that having a meeting may not necessarily elicit the information or host the conversations that we need. And so the importance of hosting conversations that matter. And so we've embraced a number of processes and technologies that aim to extract the information in a way where people can communicate against those key concepts that we're trying to establish. So we use the art of hosting, perhaps as an example, as a framework to elicit that information. Okay, so that's it for me. So over to Adam. Adam, if you could just follow on from that.
Okay. I think I was a bit busy listening there, so I've completely lost where I'm at. I guess, and just to touch on some of this, what Glenn was just talking about before I move into some of the individual examples, which I won't go into in too much detail, but I guess one of the important things organisationally for us, particularly in terms of the organisation and the staffing culture, was certainly about saying that traditionally, as Lucy said, we were a very much a disability organisation in the early days. We worked pretty much entirely with people with disability. Then we started working with older people that could be 100 years old, that could be, could have a whole range of different backgrounds and different experiences. We then also started working and doing quite a bit of work with kids as young as 5 or 6 years old. So I think one of the things we recognised through starting to work in really diverse communities, as Lucy said, we work sort of in some really rural and remote areas as well. We're doing a lot of work now in West Sydney with, particularly with Indigenous communities. So I think as much as an organisation we've said, all right, we need to be clear about our purpose, and now we're saying as an organisation we exist to connect individuals and communities. I guess within that there's a whole heap of challenges for us in saying how do we actually know if that's happening and what does that look like for different people. So if you're 5 years old, what it means to feel and be included in community is very different to if you're an Indigenous person at the age of 60 years old. So I guess in terms of looking at community indicators in particular, our real aim has been about saying what are the common things that we think would suggest that people are included in community life. What is common across a range of different communities, and also what are the key things that we might look for in particular locations or areas that might be more of a focus for some communities. So for example, we do lots of work in the Loddon Mallee region, particularly up around and outside of Mildura, Swan Hill. So we know that what is important for people to be included in community is not necessarily whether or not there's a bus that goes past the house, because it probably doesn't. But the things that they need to remain connected to one another, things as simple as, you know, internet connections and being able to connect with family and that sort of stuff, become really, really important, more so in those areas. So I guess in terms of looking at indicators, we're not only looking at what are the common things across all people we work with, but also what are the things unique to different populations that perhaps we need to focus on more. And I guess that sort of leads us into... there's a bit of information up there which I won't go through too much, but one of the really strong focuses for us over the last couple of years has been looking at the way that we plan with individuals. So I guess we're really recognising that not only do we need to know that what we're doing is working for individuals, but we also need to know collectively that what we're doing is having an impact at a community level. And what that means in terms of things like community indicators becomes really, really significant. And we know through the work that we do that how we influence that for individuals is very much based around the way that we plan with every one of the 8,000 people we might work with. So a lot of our work has been focused around developing a planning framework that we're implementing across the organisation that actually identifies core life areas for all people that we work with that we know are important for people to have a good life, to feel included in the things that they need to be included in. So in developing this planning framework and identifying different life areas, some of the work that we've then started to do is to have a look at what those indicators are for the organisation. How do we know if people are included? And starting to create some alignment between how we plan with people and what relationship it has to those overall outcomes. And it's not something that we've done before. So traditionally our sector, I guess, is we're very much relationship based. We get by because we know people, we talk to people, we work with people. When there's something wrong, they tell us and then we try and change it. We're absolutely appalling, really, as a sector on actually gathering information and data and evidence behind what we do. So it's been really challenging for us to go down this track. But something, I guess, that we're recognising, as Lucy touched on also, that with such a huge amount of reforms, both within the aged care area that we work in and also the National Disability Insurance Scheme, I think we start to realise really quickly that because we take our role in advocacy very seriously, it's very hard to hold a place in that advocacy space unless we actually have evidence behind what we're saying. So if we're going forward to NDIS saying, well, what about this particular population of people and what's happening in this geographic area, and we say, oh, it's just because we know people and they told us that that's really important, doesn't really work. So I guess there's some really, really strong links for us around not only understanding geographically what's happening for community, but also knowing what that looks like for the people that we work with. And I guess the real importance for us is also about recognising that while we might work with people with disability and older people predominantly, they are also members of community across a whole range of different areas across the country. So what they experience, particularly in terms of some of the data that we might access through Community Indicators Victoria, often the opportunities to experience things on an equal par, I guess, with other community members is hindered significantly. So a lot of our work is about saying what is the difference there, what does community feel and see, and then what do people we work with feel and see, and how do we bridge that gap so that there is some level of equality in the opportunities people can access. Did you want to add anything?
Probably the only comment that I would make. Oh, sorry, I've been. Probably the only comment that I would make was we've recognised the role in placemaking and working with local government to look at some of the influences that local government and property developers and other people use when they're creating structures that people are going to live within. And so the indicators actually have one of the indicators is about people feeling part of the community. And so we're referencing that and looking at some of the influences to see how in fact we can measure the work of local government and ourselves to inform how people feel included or not, and to see whether some of the work that we may do will actually inform or influence, turn the curve if you will, on how people experience their community by feeling a part of it. So we also, a significant part of our work that is emerging is the need to participate in placemaking. So, and the indicators again will support that.
So I guess just if I miss this, I'll get in trouble afterwards, so I better mention it quickly. One of the examples which was on the screen before is a particular project we're doing in the inner east of Melbourne. And the particular project is based around a number of people receiving funding through the Transport Accident Commission that have complex support needs, spinal cord injuries and a whole range of barriers to what they otherwise would be able to do. In this particular project, there's been a purpose-built apartment block, which is just integrated housing, but there is 4 apartments within 60 apartment block allocated and purposefully designed and fitted out for people with complex support needs. So these particular individuals are able to move in and live in their own home. These particular homes are set up things as simple as the individual tenants each have an iPad which controls opening and closing the blinds, opening and closing the doors, answering the phone, turning on the heater, turning off the heater. All these things that in any other environment these particular individuals would be in a bed and they would be waiting for a staff member to come in and say, okay, you can get out of bed now and I'll help you. Really, really life-changing stuff. So it's a really significant project for us that's only kicked off a couple of months ago. So I guess in a sense that's one of the environments that we're really starting to test out, particularly work we've done around the results-based accountability framework. And starting to actually work with people to ask the question, I think, which probably stands out the most about the results-based accountability for those that are aware of it. Really starting to focus on the idea of actually asking people, are you better off? Are we actually doing anything that's making your life better? If we're just maintaining things for people, then we're not really achieving what we exist for as an organisation, because our purpose is about improving inclusion for people and for communities. So I guess this is just an example of some of the things that we're using in terms of gathering data, with a particular focus around using a variety of different wellbeing indicators and indexes to actually understand for people what their experience is, but also with a real focus on people actually still, I guess, maintaining the integrity in that it's still coming in some aspects from the people themselves to say this is what I experience, this is what I see, because particularly in our sector where we certainly run the risk if we rely too much on only data in isolation of this sort of stuff that we're not actually responding to people. So that's just a bit of an example. I guess the other thing which I think was touched on and is that through the gathering of data and through our planning with individuals to understand from them as an individual what they need and what sort of services they need, and whether or not that is, I guess, consistent with what we know about communities at a community level. Through doing that, we then have the opportunity, obviously, to collate that data across the organisation, and suddenly we have a data set for potentially, 8,000 people that says, people Annecto works with have particular issues in these areas. So as an organisation, we're now, I guess, at the point in saying if we can actually get hold of that, aside from just saying, now we're going to work in community as well as with individuals, which sounds great, This actually gives us the opportunity to have data that tells us where in community we're going to work. So if we know through working with people that a large percentage of individuals, don't have access to internet, for argument's sake, then we know as an organisation, really important for many people nowadays, that without that access to technology and digital inclusion, opportunities for people absolutely go out the window. So we would then, as an organisation, be saying, all right, what organisations, what companies, what businesses do we need to partner with to influence some change in that space? So I guess it's, while we say we work in community, the idea is actually to be working in community where we know we're needed, and still consistent with our purpose. I think I've already covered some of that stuff. Did you want to add?
Sorry.
I'll just talk till the end of time. So.
I just wanted to talk just so quickly about who are we influencing and as we said, so in I guess reorientating our organisation from that of into an inclusion organisation, is that it's really an opportunity to start talking about this and be able to influence within the sector as well, and those that we partner with. One of the recent examples is through the Abbotsford project is, as we said, it's through TAC. Our partnership is with TAC and the Summer Foundation, who are advocates for young people in nursing home. And they actually received a grant through the Ripple, which is the business development arm of the TAC, who are actually building the developments, the housing developments, and that there is 5. Abbotsford was the first of 5 housing developments across Melbourne to actually support people with who through TAC to actually live in those homes. Ripple Project is actually the Summer Foundation have actually been engaging with the Yarra City Council to look at ways about the area to be more accessible, and so they're using the information from the individuals who've moved into this development to actually look at how can they I guess change their own process, change what they're doing about accessibility and gathering their own information. And so some of the recommendations is about using individual data to look at what are the themes coming out of accessibility issues in the local council. So that report is actually going to be used for all of the future developments in those local areas to actually use to inform that process about using that as an audit of themes that are coming out about accessibility. So that's just one small example that we're actually using. Did you want to? Yeah, and I guess the other thing is actually just we are attempting to influence the age and disability sectors in terms of the idea about focusing on the work that we need to do in the community to actually make things more accessible for individuals at a community level. So that's really it. So thank you very much. I hope we've actually given you a bit of an insight into our journey of change. We have such a long way to go, as we have all said, and hopefully if we get the opportunity to maybe come back and talk in maybe in a year's time, is that we should have, we will have data to be able to actually present to you, and actually more examples of some of the intentional work in the communities to actually try and support for communities to be a little bit more accessible.